Welcome to another edition of the Apostasy Report. My name is Joshua, and here we are in the unfortunate age of political Christianity. Biblical Christianity is being more and more obscured in today's climate, and the term Christian or the label Christian has been so politicized that it's typically just used as leverage to further a political agenda by both the right and the left in American politics. Now, this is not a new problem, but it is becoming a more pronounced problem. And so if you are a Christian, if you are truly a born-again follower of Jesus, and politics preoccupy your every thought, at best you are spiritually unhealthy, and at worst you might not be a Christian at all. Politics should not be what drive you. They should not be the all-encompassing factor in your life. It was Leonard Ravenhill who used to say, "The answers are not found in the White House. The answers are found in God's house." It is God who raises up kings and subdues nations, sovereignly orchestrating things according to his purpose. And so a chariot and horses are vain hope in the day of battle. It is the Lord who delivers. That said, we must acknowledge that God often uses institutions such as the White House to achieve his purposes. And so while we should not be preoccupied with or driven by political thought and inquiry, neither should we discount it altogether. There is some happy medium. But if you're more interested in the political landscape than you are the biblical landscape, or if you're more intrigued by political discourse than you are biblical discourse, again, I say at best, you're spiritually unhealthy, and at worst, perhaps not a Christian at all. Your goal should be to constantly be being formed into the image of Christ, seeking to follow his precepts. And yet, Paul says, were you called as a slave in 1 Corinthians 7? Don't be concerned about it, but if you can be made free, then rather use it. If you can leverage something to your benefit, then use it. Use it for what end? For the end of following God's word. And so there's this admonition in 1 Timothy chapter 2, a very practical reason why we are exhorted to pray for leaders, presidents, kings, those in authority. In this sense, politics should interest us. And in this sense, we should pray for those who are in authority. 1 Timothy chapter 2 says this, beginning in verse 1, "Therefore I exhort, first of all, that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings and all who are in authority, that," here's the reason, "that we may lead quiet and peaceable lives in all godliness and reverence. For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth." God desires all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. And to the extent that we might live quiet and peaceable lives in all godliness and reverence, we should pray for those in authority, acknowledging that some people are more likely to foster or cultivate an environment whereby that will be a reality in our lives, more so than others. And so then the question naturally comes, well, do you support Donald Trump? Do you think Donald Trump is a born-again believer in Jesus? No, I don't. I don't think Donald Trump is a born-again believer in Jesus. I hope he becomes one, and I am exhorted to pray for him. At the very least, for the sake of myself and the church at large, that we might be able to live quiet and peaceable lives, have greater doors for the purposes of evangelism and without the threat of persecution. These are good things. So I have not seen any evidence to suggest that Donald Trump is a born-again follower in Jesus. In fact, I've seen evidence to the contrary, not least of which would be his heretical spiritual advisor, Paula White, which we'll get into in a moment. That said, do I think Donald Trump is overtly antagonistic or hostile to Christians or Christianity? No, I don't. And unfortunately, for better or for worse, in America, we have a two-party system. Either a Republican or a Democrat is winning in the presidential election. And to use the most recent example, it was Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. Given those two options, which one of them is more likely to cultivate an environment where Christians can live quiet and peaceable lives? This is not even a topic for debate, as I see it. It is so patently obvious that Donald Trump is more likely and is cultivating an environment that is better for Christians to live their lives in. Now, I did a video about a year and a half ago called Being a Conservative Does Not Make You a Christian. It's no less true today. There are a great many lost people whose trust and hope is in their political persuasion, their Republican voting record, their pro-life marching, their Southern Baptist church attendance. A great many people are so preoccupied with their political persuasions that it has effectively become their god, and they are as lost as your run-of-the-mill heathen. Being a conservative has absolutely no bearing on whether or not you are a genuine follower of Christ. Being a conservative, voting Republican, does not mean you're a Christian. But if you identify with the leftist political spectrum in America, if you identify with liberal politics and the Democratic Party in America, it is proof positive that you are not a Christian. So while being a conservative is no evidence that you are a Christian, being a liberal or identifying with leftist politics in America is clear evidence that you are not. Because the Democratic Party in America is overtly antagonistic to biblical causes, overtly hostile to the cause of Christianity in general. So while Donald Trump may not be a Christian, he is not overtly hostile or antagonistic to Christians, and in fact is cultivating an environment where 1 Timothy chapter 2 is more likely to be a reality in your life than the opposite. So you have two extremes. You have a group of people that have an irrational hatred for Donald Trump that is rooted in their leftist ideologies. And those leftist ideologies come from a lack of grounding in the Bible. You cannot come to conclusions that are sympathetic to the causes of socialism and the welfare state and abortion and the eradication of gender and so forth. If you're grounded in Scripture, you just can't come to those conclusions. So you have this group of people who hate him with a perfect hatred because they're irrational, and it's on that basis. And then you have another group of people, unfortunately, who have crossed the bounds from supporting his secular office to therefore condoning and promoting spiritual things that they ought not. Both of these are very dangerous places to be. You can support someone in their profession without agreeing with their theology. I can support my local police department without paying mind to whether or not they're Mormons. There's a difference between supporting somebody in their work and then having them involved in fellowship with you or calling them a brother in the Lord. One is fellowship and one is not. If you work at a normal job and you're a Christian, you very likely work with more unbelievers than believers. Can you support them in their work? Well, of course, you're co-laboring with them. Does that mean that you support their theology or you support anything they do at home? No, not necessarily. There's a difference between your occupation and this job and what constitutes fellowship. And so one can support Donald Trump as the president of the United States, and you're commanded to pray for him. You can support what he's doing insofar as that is providing a better environment or a better climate for Christian living. Some people take it too far. We're going to try to unpack all of this. It's a little bit different than what's normally covered here, but the spiritual implications and ramifications of either of these errors are massively important. And so if you haven't been living under a rock, you know that Donald Trump has recently been impeached, the third president in the United States history who's been impeached. And yet the first president who has been impeached without there being a listed federal crime. He's been impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors, except there's been no listed crime or misdemeanor. This has been chalked up to an abuse of power regarding a phone call that he had with the president of the Ukraine. The entire thing is a sham. It's a hoax. It's a big circus that would give P.T. Barnum a run for his money. And Lord willing, something that will die in the Senate. But here we are. Since before Donald Trump was even sworn into office, you had people saying they were going to impeach him. They didn't know what for yet, but they were going to contrive a reason. So the attacks were out of the gate right away. You had Bernie Sanders screaming about the emoluments clause. You had everybody screaming about Russian collusion, a ridiculous investigation that ensued that's likely going to lead to criminal prosecution of those that initiated that investigation. That was a dead end. Then they started talking about this woman, Stormy Daniels, and then they held a big hearing to try to oust his Supreme Court nominee, Mr. Kavanaugh. From every step of the way, there has been nothing but irrational hatred toward Donald Trump from the God-hating left. So while Donald Trump is not a born-again believer, he's certainly not doing the overtly biblically antagonistic left any favors. So Donald Trump's been impeached, and now you got the Christianity Today, right? This prominent so-called Christian magazine founded by Billy Graham, calling for Trump's removal from office. And the soon-to-be former editor-in-chief, Mark Galli, wrote this article just a couple of days ago. And here's what he says. The facts in this instance are unambiguous. He's talking about facts, unambiguous facts. The President of the United States attempted to use his political power to coerce a foreign leader to harass and discredit one of the President's political opponents. He's referring, of course, to Joe Biden. That is not only a violation of the Constitution, more importantly, it is profoundly immoral. This is his big qualm, Mark Galli. This profoundly immoral action of what he characterizes as attempting to harass and discredit a political opponent by coercing a foreign leader to look into this. So then he goes down and says, here's why many aren't shocked about this, which betrays that he really has other issues. So he's saying that he's really just disturbed about what's happened during the impeachment hearings, the facts that he says have come to light. But down here he says his Twitter feed alone, with its habitual string of mischaracterizations, lies, and slanders, is a near-perfect example of a human being who is morally lost and confused. You know, if I had to characterize the House impeachment hearings, I could not think of a better description than a habitual string of mischaracterizations, lies, and slanders. And those who perpetrated these things could be summed up as human beings who are morally lost and confused. People like Nancy Pelosi and Jerry Nadler and Adam Schiff. The whole thing has been an exercise in rank false witness from start to finish. Even if Donald Trump were a heathen of the heathens, it would still constitute false witness. If the sort of things that were being said about Donald Trump to justify this impeachment were said about Hillary Clinton, who is about as godless as they come, I would still say it is false witness. You don't get to bear false witness against somebody because they're wrong about one thing. If somebody's convicted of murder, you don't get to also tag on grand larceny. Somebody is guilty of what they're guilty of and not anything more than that. Right? So they take issue with his checkered moral past, or what have you, right? The great irony here is the people that are playing the morality card have none whatsoever. They have negative morals. They are characterized and marked by their disdain for anything even approaching godliness. And they want to talk about morals. Well, let's focus on Mark Galli. This is his big... He's upset about the profound immorality of Donald Trump. So he goes on CNN, does an interview. Let's get a little bit from Mark here.
Important. And you say it's not a matter of politics, it's a matter of faith. Why?
Well, because there are times, of course, when there are issues that transcend politics. So to me, this is one of them. I mean, I grant that the Democrats have been partisan in their efforts to remove the president, and at times I think have been unfair. There's no question about that. But in this particular instance, the facts that arose in the impeachment hearings rise above that partisan level. And one of the things I'm trying to say in the editorial is, this is reality. No matter how it came about or the motives that helped it come about, this is the world we live in, this is the president we have, and we need to deal with that honestly.
All right, let's just stop right there and evaluate the contradictory statements of Mr. Mark Galli. Now, so he concedes that the Democrats have been partisan and unfair in this whole impeachment hearing. And yet he says that the facts that came out are unambiguous. It's very clear that Donald Trump engaged in immoral behavior by coercing a foreign leader. Okay, you can't have it both ways, Mark. If the facts are unambiguous and clear, then they haven't been partisan and unfair. If they had a legitimate reason to impeach him, how could you accuse them of being partisan and unfair? You would say, they're not partisan, they're not unfair, they have unambiguous facts to appeal to. It's very clear Donald Trump violated the Constitution, and this is profoundly immoral. Therefore, they're not partisan and unfair. But he's speaking out of both sides of his mouth. Of course, they're partisan and unfair, but, the facts are clear. Well, which one is it? If the facts are so clear, why would you accuse them of being partisan and unfair? Already, you can see this double-mindedness. It doesn't make any sense. What facts is he talking about? For those that are unfamiliar, let's just briefly touch on this. The big fact in this whole impeachment inquiry is that Donald Trump supposedly was soliciting personal favors from the government of Ukraine to, as Mark Galli puts it, harass and discredit Joe Biden, whose son was presiding over a board of a company that was about to be prosecuted. Joe Biden's son, Hunter, arguably the least qualified person to be on that board, and so it rather looks like Joe Biden was getting personal favors for his son, and then a prosecution was halted that might have implicated his son in some wrongdoing. So here's the big impeachment linchpin here. Donald Trump says to, here's the unclassified transcript of the phone call. He says, I would like you to do us a favor. Stop right there. Who is us? I would like you to do us a favor. Let's just count the words it takes before this us is qualified. Here's us. Do us a favor. 1, 2, 3. All right, we'll just call it the fourth word. Our country. That's us, our country. This is not a personal favor for Donald Trump, nor is he offering some reward for doing it. He says, I would like you to do us a favor because our country has been through a lot, and the Ukraine knows. Okay. Scroll down a little further. Donald Trump says, the other thing, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, Hunter Biden, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the attorney general would be great. So Donald Trump is asking the president of the Ukraine to look into a potential criminal activity that took place at the hands of the former U.S. Vice President Joe Biden. Ironically, what would have been an abuse of power, a legitimate abuse of power. Some would argue a violation of the emoluments clause that Bernie Sanders is accusing Donald Trump of violating. How ironic is that? They're saying Donald Trump violated his power by inquiring into this illegal activity. But if this illegal activity is substantiated, it means that they're trying to impeach Donald Trump for looking into something that Joe Biden actually did, which is abuse his power and gain personal favor from a government while sitting as an elected official. What a big sham this is. So this is the whole thing. They had nothing with Russia. They had nothing any step of the way, and they are running out of time and desperate, and they settled on this. This is what Mark Galli says is profoundly immoral. Profoundly immoral, says Mark Galli. Let's get another quote from another excerpt from Mark Galli here.
His characterization of us as being far left is far from accurate. We consider ourselves, and most people consider us, a pretty centrist magazine in the evangelical world. We're certainly not far right, and I suppose anyone who's not far right, he would consider far left, and this is right to say that, but it's factually inaccurate that we're far left. We're pretty centrist. We rarely comment on politics unless we feel it rises to the level of some national or concern that is really important, and that this would be a case. We wrote editorials about Clinton during his impeachment.
Okay, so he goes on. We wrote editorials about Clinton and Nixon, but we rarely comment on politics. He says we're not far left. We're pretty centrist. We're not far right, but we're not left. Donald Trump's characterization of us is false. Okay, so Donald Trump, two things happen here. Billy Graham founded this magazine. All right, so Franklin Graham comes out, his son, and says, yes, Billy Graham founded Christianity Today, but no, he would not agree with their piece. He'd be disappointed. Okay. Donald Trump says, I guess the magazine Christianity Today is looking for Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, or those of the socialist communist bent to guard their religion. How about Sleepy Joe? The fact is, no president has ever done what I've done for evangelicals or religion itself. He made another comment saying that this was a far-left and progressive magazine. Mark Galli says, no, we're not. We're pretty centrist. In fact, we rarely comment on politics unless it rises to this level of impeachment. They're not a political magazine, and if they are, they're quite centrist, so he says. Oh, boy. All right. Let's just evaluate this briefly, and it's going to get worse as we go. Q&A, Barack Obama, I believe in the redemptive work, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, published by Christianity Today. God's will in the public square, Democratic Senator Barack Obama gets it mostly right. No, he doesn't. Another Christianity Today article, Preach and Reach, despite his liberal record, Barack Obama's making a lot of evangelicals think twice. Then they're probably not evangelicals. How about this one from Ron Sider? Why I am voting for Hillary Clinton. He goes on to say about Donald Trump here, Trump's recent pro-life stand is not credible. Historically, he has supported abortion access, even to partial birth abortion, and still supports Planned Parenthood, the country's largest supplier of abortions. Hillary Clinton is one of the most outspoken proponents of Planned Parenthood. But again, published by Christianity Today, this centrist magazine, they rarely comment on politics, and when they do, they're very centrist. How about this one from Mark Galli himself? In the battle between LGBT rights and religious freedom, both can win. He says, we must not seek legislation that protects our freedom if that same legislation denies the rights of people with whom we disagree. If it really comes down to a choice of protecting our liberty or the civil rights of others, a long stream of Christian ethics, beginning with Jesus, argues we should deny ourselves. Translation: he thinks it is a right for the institution of marriage to be afforded to homosexual couples. He doesn't say that, but that's the clear implication. He also says, if you're given the option to protect your liberty to worship God or to defend the right of a homosexual couple to get married, you should deny yourself and defend them. This is the wayward, backward, radically unchristian thinking of the editor of this so-called Christian magazine. But it gets better. He says Jesus suggested we should look beyond the symbolic condoning of injustice, helping a soldier, to a deeper ethic. Jesus told his disciples to put it into today's terms, get ready for his translation, that when asked to bake a cake for a gay wedding, we might offer to bake two. That's the conclusion he came to from Matthew chapter 5, which says if somebody compels you to go with them 1 mile, go with them 2, right? Which is a matter of a personal inconvenience, not a matter of condoning overt wickedness. How far should we take this one, Mark? If somebody asks you to do 1 abortion, you do 2? Somebody asks you to say 1 Hail Mary, you say 2? This is the dereliction of this editor of Christianity Today, who is a radical leftist and claims he's not, which makes him a liar. We're going to get one final quote here. 2, actually, right here.
Read this. You say, to the many evangelicals who continue to support Mr. Trump in spite of his blackened moral record, we might say this: remember who you are and whom you serve. Consider how your justification of Mr. Trump influences your witness to your Lord and Savior. Consider what an unbelieving world will say if you continue to brush off Mr. Trump's immoral words and behavior in the cause of political expediency. To me, you were saying here, this isn't just about President Trump. This is about you. Why do you think it was important to say that?
Well, it's because as a Christian, I like to think of myself as a person who has given my ultimate loyalty to Jesus Christ and the gospel he's called us to proclaim. So when Christians of any stripe support a cause that strikes me as manifestly immoral, it does damage to the cause that I've given my life to. So I think that's one part of the equation that all Christians, especially my brothers and sisters in the evangelical world, need to think about more seriously and more deeply.
When Christians of any stripe support a cause that strikes him as manifestly immoral, it does damage to the cause he's given his life to, right? Well, as much as Mark Galli would like to think that and consider himself a Christian who's given his life to Jesus, his actions and his duplicity betray otherwise. He's a Christian in his head. This is a label for him that he is using for political advantage from a magazine that is far from centrist and absolutely is progressive and anti-biblical in more ways than a few, which you're about to see. So notice what he says, right? He has a problem with the immorality. It's not about politics, it's about moral standards. Because after all, Mark Galli fancies himself something of a Christian, right? So when anybody who calls themselves a Christian supports any cause that is manifestly immoral, he's got to do something about it. So, now my question is there anything manifestly immoral about Barack Obama, Mark Galli? Because here's 3 favorable and sympathetic articles about him written by what I suppose are people who fancy themselves some stripe of Christian. After all, they're writing for Christianity Today. So is there anything manifestly immoral about those who supported Barack Obama? Because I can't recall, and I couldn't find in all my research, one instance of him calling for the removal of Barack Obama over an 8-year term. Where were you on that one, Mark? Nothing manifestly immoral about Barack Obama? How about Hillary Clinton? Is this guy Ron Sider some stripe of Christian? Is there nothing manifestly immoral about supporting Hillary Clinton? Where's Mark Galli's rebuke on this one? But Donald Trump, profoundly immoral. Forget that. Mark Galli himself wants you to bake 2 wedding cakes, 2 gay wedding cakes. Nothing profoundly immoral about that? You know, John Wesley had a rule about money. Earn all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. These were his thoughts on money. But he also had another rule. If he knew that somebody was going to use that money for destructive purposes, like buying alcohol or something, he wouldn't give it to them, because he would be contributing to their destruction and their damnation. Mark Galli thinks you need to bake 2 gay wedding cakes. Nothing manifestly immoral there. He wants you to fight for the right of people, gay couples, to get married, more than you should fight for your right to worship God. You can already see his moral standards are quite different from the ones found in the Bible. let me remind you of who and what Barack Obama is, just in case you forgot. Mind you, 3 quite sympathetic articles about Barack Obama, who they claim believes in the redemptive death of Jesus Christ and the resurrection, who they believe gets it mostly right, and who they believe is making a lot of evangelicals think twice. Here's Barack Obama.
Slavery is okay. Leviticus guide our public policy. Which passages of Scripture should guide our public policy? Should we go with Leviticus, which suggests slavery is okay, and that eating shellfish is an abomination? Or we could go with Deuteronomy, which suggests stoning your child if he strays from the faith? Or should we just stick to the Sermon on the Mount, a passage that is so radical that it's doubtful that our own Defense Department would survive its application?
So there's Barack Obama mocking both testaments of the Bible. Nothing manifestly immoral about that one, Mark? Did you urge Christians to call for his removal from office? Because you've been working for Christianity Today for the better part of 30 years. So you were there when these 3 favorable articles were written about Barack Obama. Where was your objection? Nothing manifestly immoral. How about his support of Planned Parenthood, who even their own contributor, Ron Sider, says, what does he say about Planned Parenthood? The country's largest supplier of abortion, right? Christianity Today's own contributor, Ron Sider, acknowledges Planned Parenthood is the country's largest supplier of abortion. Here's Barack Obama.
It's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. It is not. Planned Parenthood is not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere today. It's not going anywhere tomorrow. As long as we've got to fight to make sure women have access to quality, affordable health care, and as long as we've got to fight to protect a woman's right to make her own choices about her own health, I want you to know that you've also got a president who's going to be right there with you, fighting every step of the way.
Translation: as long as you want to kill a baby in the womb, Barack Obama is going to fight for you to do that. Nothing manifestly immoral about that one, Mark Galli? How about Hillary Clinton's stance on abortion and Planned Parenthood? Here's what she says.
Has said he's in favor of defunding Planned Parenthood. He even supported shutting the government down to defund Planned Parenthood. I will defend Planned Parenthood. I will defend Roe v. Wade, and I will defend women's rights to make their own health care decisions. He said women...
Nothing surprising here. What's surprising is that they don't find Ron Sider's big special feature about voting for Hillary to be manifestly immoral. For if they did, surely Mark Galli, the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, would have issued some sort of rebuke. Is this not an affront to everything you've given your life to? No, nothing manifestly immoral here, huh? Interesting how that works, isn't it? Let's contrast that with Donald Trump's stance regarding Planned Parenthood.
Put aside Donald Trump's tweets and his media distractions, and here is the policy that the Trump administration is rolling out today, a broad and drastic cut to health organizations that are involved in pro-choice counseling and abortion. That hits clinics, it hits Planned Parenthood, and critics say it could endanger women's health and limit constitutionally protected medical choices. The immediate result here is cuts of millions of dollars in federal funding to any group that provides referrals or even procedures related to abortions, a policy broader than just limiting money for abortion itself, which is already...
Millions of dollars. They cut millions of dollars from Planned Parenthood, contrary to this lying man, Ron Sider, who says Trump still supports Planned Parenthood. That's what he says. What else? What else has happened during the Trump administration?
$1 million a year.
Listen.
Other clinics elsewhere. In total, they're turning down about $60 million a year.
$60 million.
We refuse to engage with an administration that is going to force us not to deliver the best possible care to our patients.
Planned Parenthood acting president and CEO Alexis McGill Johnson says her organization was forced out of the Title X funding by the Trump administration.
Whoa.
Title X subsidizes family planning services for some 4 million women nationwide.
Okay. Planned Parenthood Funding cut by $60 million. So just to show the contrast on one massive issue regarding killing babies, Mark Galli sees nothing manifestly immoral with the promotion or even the sympathetic tacit promotion of two of the most outspoken proponents of what even they concede is the country's largest supplier of abortion. Nothing wrong with promoting Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, but they're a centrist magazine. They're not far left. So I'll remind you, Mark Galli says, we rarely comment on politics, right? Rarely comment on politics unless it rises to the level of national importance. We're just going to go through some things, probably a dozen articles here. I had to stop because I was running out of space. Let's take a look. This is the president and CEO of Christianity Today, Timothy Dalrymple, on court prophets and wilderness prophets. He says, recently our president has made the latest in a long line of comments demeaning immigrants and minorities. This is typical liberal rhetoric, founded in nothingness, right? Donald Trump's a racist. You just keep saying it, and hopefully it's going to catch on. So his exhortation down here, first he says that there's frustration among non-white Christian friends that their white brethren keep silent as the president aims ugly and demeaning statements at people of color. These friends don't like what the silence of the white church is saying, and neither do we. So his exhortation back in July, let us not be silent. We are not captive to political party. We are accountable to a higher authority. Now, mind you, Mark Galli's article was not supposed to be about Twitter or supposed racial comments, but he says the facts regarding the impeachment case are unambiguous, and yet you're going to see that they have been amping themselves up to this conclusion just like the left has. They just didn't have anything to put it on. They still don't. It's an absolute sham, this whole impeachment. But they finally have articulated some abuse of power, these high crimes and misdemeanors that are supposedly unambiguous. And so you can see the ridiculous leftist rhetoric coming from the president and CEO of Christianity Today. He doesn't say what. How convenient that he leaves out. If these were so manifestly degrading, immoral, and racist, why wouldn't he put a quote and say, look, see for yourselves what Donald Trump said? He just says he made the latest in a long line of comments demeaning immigrants and minorities, but he can't list one? What kind of journalism is that? You can't even point to one? Because if you saw what Trump said, you would say, how was that demeaning? Answer, it wasn't. This is called propaganda. That's the president and CEO of Christianity Today. Remember, they are a centrist magazine and they rarely comment on politics. Buckle up. The rest of these articles, except for the last one, are written by Mark Galli himself. Here we go. Do Muslims and Christians worship the same God? This is just to establish the wayward thoughts of Mark Galli, who doesn't know what it means to be manifestly immoral. He interviews this theologian, Miroslav Volf, who claims that Christians and Muslims do worship the same God. There is not a single contradictory statement from Mark Galli. There is everything to suggest that he tacitly approves of this, or at least he doesn't approve. He's at least indifferent. Nothing manifestly immoral about somebody saying that one group of people who claim Jesus didn't even die, much less rise from the dead, worship the same God that we do. He finds nothing manifestly immoral about denying Jesus, the one he claims he's given his life to. So Mark Galli has absolutely no basis to judge anything as manifestly immoral if he can't judge the statement that Christians and Muslims worship the same God as manifestly immoral. That is the lack of moral foundation of Mark Galli. Let's continue. How Trump tempts us. Rarely he comments on politics. What does it say here? 3 devout Christians made statements last week that point to the challenge for evangelicals. Who's the first? The first comes from Pope Francis. Stop right there and let me just say, If you think Pope Francis is a devout Christian, you don't know what the term Christian means. Pope Francis is not a devout Christian because the gospel proclaimed by the Roman Catholic Church is indeed a false gospel, because the Jesus they believe in is a non-existent Jesus who turns into a cracker on Sunday. I'm not saying that to be mean. If you are a Catholic, I want you to be saved. You also need to know that there is no hope in the false gospel that is preached by Rome. Stay tuned for an upcoming video which will, by God's grace, parse that out in much more detail. But again, Mark Galli thinks Pope Francis is a devout Christian, while also engaging in another politically motivated article. But he rarely comments politically. Here you go. Why Donald Trump threatens to trump the gospel. The burden and promise of racial reconciliation. All liberal talking points. Evangelicals and race. A new chapter. After Trump, should evangelicals, Christians part ways? What to make of Donald Trump's soul? The biggest loser in the Alabama election. Political exegesis on mulligans and turning cheeks. The word political's in the title of this one. God hates gun violence. This is an anti-Second Amendment article. Loving our neighbors knows no borders, even political ones. Again, the word political's in the title of this article. No borders, no guns. Christians and Muslims worship the same God. A great and terrible nation. This one's just decrying the U.S. as a horrible place. How about this one? Not authored by him, but supervised by him as the editor-in-chief. Does socialism have to be godless? You must be kidding me right now. What is the rhetorical answer to this? No. This is a defense of socialism from a woman named Vanessa Cook, who wrote a book called Spiritual Socialists, Religion, and the American Left. This socialistically sympathetic, an article sympathetic to so-called spiritual socialism, published by Christianity Today. But they rarely talk politics. So, defense of open borders, anti-gun, race-baiting rhetoric, literal defense of socialism, but you want to call yourself centrist? What a joke. What a complete and utter joke. Christianity Today has a political agenda because they are political Christians. They use the name of Jesus for political advantage. Who's Vanessa Cook? There she is. That's the author of that book right there. One of her first tweets was, yeah, you guessed it, a support of Bernie Sanders. You know, the socialist Bernie Sanders. That's the sort of thing that Christianity Today engages in. But they're not political. They're pretty centrist. They're liars is what they are. So you can see they are motivated by politics. Everything they touch on is a liberal talking point. And the people that they support, well, we'll get into her in a second. Let's get one final comment from Mark Galli, who did an interview with Face the Nation. And you'll hear what the reporter asks him. What is your solution? Watch.
Brothers and sisters, take your interest in politics and put it aside for a moment and let's start thinking about morality. And do you really think
But if
that
there's
there is
no
a
other
balance to be made?
Republican running on these platform issues, if President Trump is the only person that on these issues you have laid out is so key to your community, some Republicans just find it an impossible alternative to vote for a Democrat.
Yeah, no, I grant that. I grant that. I'm saying what I think, and about the only person I represent is me and maybe my magazine. Not for that much longer, since I'm retiring in a few days. You know, what you do about the fact that he's morally unfit, there are a lot of political options for that. And I don't really have a whole lot to say. Some are going to say, work for his conviction at the Senate. Some are going to say, overturn him at the election. Others are saying that's all impossible. We would need to figure out a third strategy.
Yeah.
I don't have a strategy. I'm not a political person. The questions you were asking people on your show, you guys are amazing how much stuff you know and the nuances. You guys figure that out.
What a buffoon. I don't have a strategy. You guys figure that out. I don't know. This is a man who speaks hastily. He's driven by irrationality because his emotions are driving the car. I didn't really think about this. I don't know. I'm not political. Oh, really? All of these other articles say otherwise. Seems like everything he writes about. What to make of Donald Trump's soul? Racism, open borders, Donald Trump. God hates gun violence. He hasn't thought this through. I don't know. You guys figure that out. So Donald Trump correctly says, as this reporter, what's your solution here? Should we go with Hillary Clinton? Bernie Sanders, the socialist? You guys figure that out. I'm just saying he's morally unfit. Wait a second. Is the alternative morally fit? Is that what we're getting at? Or you didn't think that far ahead before you published an article for the world to see? What complete and utter buffoonery at the hands of Christianity Today, which is far from Christian in every possible way. Here's what else Christianity Today supports in the so-called evangelical community. Why women want more, an article about Beth Moore. Well, I don't know why women want more of Beth Moore, but I know why Christianity Today wants more of Beth Moore. Here she is, and she's a friend of Mark Galli. Retweeting the article against him. My hat's off to you, Mark Galli. Respect. If Beth Moore has if you have Beth Moore's respect, you probably don't have God's respect. That's the sad reality. These are political leftists who have put the title of Christian on them, and they are doing everything in their power to implement social justice values into the framework of society, and especially what is called the church, but unfortunately is not. And a lot of people are led astray by it. So Christianity Today, supporting all kinds of nonsense, haven't thought it through. I don't know what the solution is. You guys figure it out. Well, thanks for dropping that in everyone's lap, Mark, you liar. Didn't think it through. Thoroughly political. Quite leftist, progressive, has no moral qualm with people who support Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton or who say Muslims and Christians serve the same God. Nothing strikes him as manifestly immoral. But I'll tell you what, that phone call where he asked a president to look into an illegal situation regarding a possible crime, that did it for him. That was just profoundly immoral. Couldn't stand it. It's absolutely ridiculous. That's the first problem. These people are motivated by irrational hatred of Donald Trump for political reasons. But there's another problem that is also very dangerous, even more dangerous because the temptation will come to be galvanized with them to a degree that you shouldn't. Because you will agree with them that this hatred of Donald Trump is irrational. Guys like Franklin Graham and Greg Laurie and Jack Graham, to name a few. You will agree with them politically. But that does not mean you can agree with them about spiritual things necessarily either. This is the error of radical overcorrection. Ben Shapiro is a good example of somebody who I would agree with mostly politically. On superficial areas of general living and even aspects of morality, we would agree in a superficial sense. There's a lot of overlap. For those that don't know, Ben Shapiro is a practicing Jew. There's a lot of overlap in day-to-day living that both a Christian and a Jew would agree with, right? And he can see through the social justice rhetoric that is coming from people like this, and we would both agree that it's absurd. That does not, therefore, mean that I condone what Ben Shapiro believes about Jesus. I hope he gets saved. I do. As it stands, that is not the case. As it stands, Ben Shapiro denies that Jesus is the Son of God. He denies that he is the Christ. And I will refer you to another Jew named John from the first century, the Apostle John, who says, "Who is a liar but he that denies that Jesus is the Christ?" There is an antichrist spirit behind that denial. Pray for Ben Shapiro. Does that mean he is overtly antagonistic to Christians? No. Doesn't mean he's not lost. But it means that my support of him or my agreement with him has limits. I can agree with him about things as far as they pertain to secular involvement and if there's any overlapping morality. But my support of him stops there. I can't have meaningful fellowship with Ben Shapiro. And this is where people overcorrect because they are too politically invested instead of being biblically invested. Your loyalty comes to Jesus, not to Donald Trump, not to anybody. It's to Jesus. And here's the overcorrection. You have the Beth Moores of the world and the gospel coalitions of the world and the so-called evangelical left, which is an oxymoron, that hate Trump for purely political reasons. And you have people like Franklin Graham and Greg Laurie who cross over into the other error of being so politically invested, they seem to be trying to outdo each other for who can set the high score spending time in the White House, that they're now promoting heretics like Paula White, who's never not been a heretic. Here's Franklin Graham. Paula White has led an interesting life and now serves as a trusted advisor to Trump. She has a new book coming out tomorrow that you might want to check out. No, you might not. Who's issuing the who's compelling Franklin Graham to put these tweets out? I don't know. Perhaps the publisher. They might have the same publisher. Or it's their mutual affiliation with Donald Trump. In any event, Franklin Graham has crossed into another very dangerous error in being so politically minded that he's now promoting apostasy. Paula White, go read Paula White's book. You must be kidding me. She serves as a trusted advisor to Donald Trump. She's not trustworthy, not even a little bit. So while I can agree with Donald Trump or support him in the sense that he is more likely to cultivate an environment whereby the church at large can live a more quiet and peaceable life, that doesn't mean his spiritual advisors are good. That doesn't mean he's getting trusted advice from people like Paula White. I don't know how much he heeds her. But that woman is a heretic. That woman is a liar. And you might be tempted, because of the hatred on this side, to be so galvanized that your opposition, your mutual opposition of them, might cause you to favor what Franklin Graham is doing over and above that opposition. You might be in agreement that these people are crazy and irrational in their hatred for Trump, but don't be tempted to start agreeing with him that Paula White's okay to promote. This is absurd. Absolutely ridiculous. Here's Greg Laurie. Honestly, I wasn't sure what to think when I first was invited to meet Paula White. Clearly, we differed in some areas theologically, yet I've found her to be gracious and humble. I'm glad she's taken the time to write down her amazing life story. It will give you hope. Now, Greg Laurie, I believe, since deleted this tweet. But on the inside cover of Paula White's book, there's a glowing recommendation from Dr. Jack Graham and Greg Laurie. Both good friends, both spend a lot of time at the White House. So because you agree with them politically does not mean you should heed what they are saying spiritually. There are limits to this support. Yes, pray for Donald Trump. Yes, acknowledge that Hillary Clinton would have been a much worse option. No, you don't promote Paula White. This is a radically dangerous error of overcorrection. There's Franklin Graham and Paula White at the White House. There they are again. I say Paula White's a heretic. Why? Okay, probably the most known verse in the entire world is John 3:16. Right? God so loved the world that he gave what? He gave who? His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him might not perish but have eternal life. His only begotten Son. If there's one phrase that people know about that characterize who Jesus is, it's the only begotten Son of God. Here's Paula White denying that foundational truth.
Into a priestly anointing.
Jesus is not the only begotten Son of God. He is not. I'm a son of God.
He's the first fruit.
He's the first fruit. He's the firstborn of many. Jesus is not the only begotten Son of God. He is not. I'm a son of charity.
All right. Jesus is not the only begotten Son of God, according to Paula White and her deranged friend here. This is Heresy 101. This is incredibly damning. And there's Paula White denying that Jesus is the only begotten Son of God. This stems from a belief in the little gods idea. You are not deity. Jesus is. He is the only begotten Son of God. You might be adopted into God's family, but that doesn't make you the Alpha and the Omega. Jesus is the one without beginning and without end. Not you. You never will be. And he is the only begotten Son of God, insofar as he is God in human flesh. John 1:14, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, the Word that was with God and the Word that was God. There's Paula White denying it. If you ever see something like this, run. Here's Paula White.
Right now, in the name of Jesus, fire, fire. Come on, in the name of Jesus, change. Fire, 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 fire for nations. Fire.
This is a bunch of gibberish. This is ridiculous. People running around yelling fire, pretending they're speaking in tongues. This has no resemblance to anything in the Bible described as biblical tongues, which were people heard their intelligible languages spoken to them. It was discernible. This is a show. This is ridiculous. And who's she doing this in front of? Her friend Rodney Howard-Brown back here, who's been involved in all of this nonsense for years. Good friend of Kenneth Copeland. All of the people synonymous with hyper-Pentecostal extremism that's completely fake, and prosperity heresy. These are profiteers from start to finish. Don't believe me? Listen to Paula White.
Speaking prophetically by the Holy Spirit, and you are to sow a $3,000 seed. When you obey the voice of the Lord and you do what God's telling you to do, you need to send in $35,000. You need to send in that $100,000 check. I'm telling you, and God has mandated, if you do not write that P.O. box and you do not call that toll-free number and you do not become a ministry of sustainer, you will never see sustainment in your life and your dream will die. Wait.
She's being critiqued by a secular talk show host. This isn't even another Christian. Even the world can see how patently absurd Paula White's prosperity heresy is. And you have men you would think would know better, like Franklin Graham and Greg Laurie, who are promoting this apostate garbage. So you might be tempted, because you agree with them politically, because you both can see the irrational hatred of Donald Trump motivated by a God-hating leftist ideology, that therefore they're doing things that are right. No. Somebody might be right about 5 things. It doesn't mean they're right about 6 things. So because both of you might be right that this impeachment of Donald Trump is a big hoax and a big sham, you might be tempted to side with Franklin Graham or Greg Laurie or Jack Graham in other things, like the promotion of this rank heretic, Paula White. Be very careful. Your job as a Christian is to be biblically minded. Have the mind of Christ in you. Follow his word and his precepts. Is it true that Donald Trump is more likely to and is cultivating an environment whereby you can live a quiet and peaceable Christian life, largely without the threat of persecution, largely with wider open doors for evangelism and so forth? Yes, that is absolutely true. And in that sense, he is a breath of fresh air politically. He has disrupted establishment politics. Both sides of the aisle quite confused by him. That does not therefore mean that you cross over into the other error of promoting the wayward spiritual things that Trump is heeding or giving credence to. He's not a theologian. That's not why you should support Donald Trump. I don't know I can't think of a born-again Christian in recent memory who's been elected to the office of the presidency. None of the Bushes, Clinton, Obama, none of them. And yet, there is a reality that despite someone not being a believer, they might be more advantageous or it might be more beneficial. Paul appealed to Caesar for a reason, not because Caesar was a God-fearing man, but it might have had, it was going, as he thought, to be more advantageous to his cause in the moment. If you can be made free, rather use it, 1 Corinthians 7. But you pray for your leaders. You pray for Donald Trump. Hopefully he becomes saved. If there were men with biblical integrity around him, they would be telling him, sir, you cannot heed the voice of this Paula White. They could support Trump in a secular office, but no further than that. These men have stepped into the error of overcorrection. Don't fall victim to it as well. Is Christianity Today Christian? Not by a long shot. They prove themselves to be godless liberals in their ideology. And yet, Franklin Graham and Greg Laurie are dangerous on the other end. 2 + 2 is not 5. Neither is it 3. Come to the right answer, in the middle. But don't fall to the gutter on the right or the gutter on the left, because there are 2 gutters. And if you're more motivated by political allegiance than you are by biblical allegiance, you're wrong. There is a balance. Pray for Donald Trump. Acknowledge that your life is probably much better than it would be if Hillary Clinton were in office. And yet acknowledge that the promotion of Paula White is an abomination in the sight of God. Until next time, God bless and Godspeed.